In the last video, we explored the shadow, everything we refuse to admit or embrace about ourselves. Today, we'll dive into the principle of embracing the shadow and tackle an important question. Why accept what we see as negative or bad? Isn't it better to focus solely on the good, on the qualities we want to cultivate? The truth is, we often reject what feels opposite to us. We embrace what we label as good and push away what we consider bad. For instance, if we see ourselves as spiritual, we might judge those who seem materialistic. If we grew up poor, we might resent the wealthy. This rejection isn't always intentional. It's often automatic, shaped by our upbringing, beliefs, and the culture around us. The problem with this approach is that it divides our world into opposites, good and bad, light and dark, spiritual and material, creating an internal split. This division fuels much of our inner conflict. It strengthens the ego, which thrives on judgment and separation. What we reject doesn't disappear. Instead, it gets pushed into the shadow, the hidden part of our psyche where everything we suppress is stored. The more we deny, judge, or try to suppress what we don't like, the more the shadow grows, intensifying our inner struggles and keeping us from true wholeness. So, what does this mean for us? Should we just accept everything? The answer lies in the fourth Hermetic principle, the principle of polarity. The principle of polarity teaches us that everything has two sides, two poles that aren't true opposites, but rather different degrees of the same thing. Think about it. Hot and cold aren't entirely separate. They're just points on a spectrum of temperature. As the Kabbalion puts it, everything is dual, everything has poles, everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. This idea challenges us to look at the things we usually divide into black and white categories, like good and bad, and see them for what they are, two ends of the same scale. Carl Jung explored this in depth when he criticized the idea of privatio boni, the belief that evil is merely the absence of good. He argued that this view denies the reality of darkness as a natural and intrinsic force, both in the world and within ourselves. If evil is merely a lack of good and has no real existence, how can we define good? Without substance, good would also seem insubstantial, leaving evil as nothing more than a shadow of good. For Jung, this simplistic view misses the point entirely. Life is an energetic process built on opposites, where good and evil are not absolutes, but complementary forces. They're the moral expressions of polarity, both essential for maintaining balance and for the fullness of human experience. Now, let's connect this to the shadow. These rejected traits we label as negative, or even those we secretly admire in others, aren't entirely separate from us. They are often just a reflection of the qualities we've buried or ignored within ourselves. What we dislike or envy in others tends to mirror something unresolved in us, which is why these traits can trigger such strong reactions. What if, instead of condemning or suppressing them, we use the principle of polarity to understand them? For example, arrogance could be seen as confidence taken to an extreme, or stubbornness as persistence that's become inflexible. By shifting our perspective, we begin to see these traits not as enemies, but as parts of ourselves that can be balanced and integrated. When we stop fighting our shadow and start seeing these traits as linked to the qualities we value, something profound happens. We begin to create balance within ourselves. Instead of rejecting or suppressing these parts, we learn to understand them and turn them into strengths. This shift transforms judgment into acceptance and suppression into growth, helping us embrace the full spectrum of who we are. By embracing opposites instead of fighting them, we find harmony. Light cannot exist without dark, just as joy cannot exist without sorrow. This understanding allows us to create a sense of wholeness within, where opposing forces no longer feel like a battle, but parts of a greater balance. The idea of polarity has long been a cornerstone of personal growth and ancient spiritual wisdom. It teaches us that opposites are not enemies, but different expressions of the same truth, guiding us toward integration and transformation.